the ongoing challenges that Eskom is currently facing. You would have seen or heard a little bit earlier on today the Public Enterprises Minister as well as the Chairperson of the Eskom board had a media briefing to try and reach out to the public, and by and large saying that they need time and asking the public to be patient. Well, joining us now in studio is the Shadow Minister of Public Enterprises for the Democratic Alliance and MP Natasha Mazzone. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you.
All right. So you heard your counterpart today. Your first reactions to what was said in the media briefing?
Well, I was hoping that today we would have a little bit more certainty of where we're going in the coming weeks. We must by this stage know exactly where the problems are. We've had a lot of the problems blamed on Kahora Bassa. We know that that is quite a small amount of electricity in the greater scheme of things. So I felt personally very let down that we were given a very vague apology and a very vague prognosis for where we're going. I think South Africans are now experiencing terror. Today I was on the ground, I was in Ivory Park and in certain parts of Johannesburg. People are really suffering. Businesses are closing down. Doctors were telling me that there's an increase in diarrhea and vomiting because the cold chain is being broken in food. Elderly people on oxygen, their machines not working. We are honestly in a crisis period, and I just don't feel that absolute need from the government that they understand that South Africa is terrified and we're in this crisis mode.
All right, so when I talk to the opposition party, it can quite easily sort of descend into a conversation of campaigning, but people want to know what the solutions are. So this is your portfolio. What are the solutions? What can we do to fix what's going on?
Well, you must remember that this portfolio was called Team One South Africa up until quite recently. And we weren't a party about a portfolio about political parties. We were really the party that was looking after South African interests. And I'd like to think that we still are. The solutions are actually quite simple. We have this monopoly, this gigantic dinosaur monopoly that can no longer produce enough electricity to provide South Africa with their requirement. Our base load is no longer secure. So the immediate solution would be is to separate Eskom into two entities. Keep the transmission and the grid as a South African asset, because it is an asset that we should keep. But certainly with the generation, start a privatization program. It doesn't have to be a full privatization, but at least enter the privatization market where you allow private power producers to enter the grid and to sell to Eskom, because Eskom simply doesn't have the capability to keep up with demand. Then go one step further and tell a municipality, if you are financially viable and functioning, you yourself can buy your own electricity in bulk to sell in your municipality, and immediately we will overcome this absolute crisis that we're in right now.
All right, so those municipalities that can't afford it, what do? You bypass them and sell directly to the public?
You could always bypass and sell directly to the public, which has worked very well in Eskom direct feed areas. What you must remember is many of the problems that arise out of Eskom is the municipal debt, and that's because, say for example, you and I live in a town, we pay our electricity bill, but the municipal manager hasn't paid their Eskom bill, and that's part of the huge debt problem that Eskom finds itself in. So those municipalities that don't have the capability yet of functioning and buying their own electricity, the consortium as Eskom or as the independent system monitoring market operator would do, they would provide energy to those municipalities, but always with an outlook of those municipalities eventually being able to buy electricity themselves.
So the privatization, so the unbundling, you sort of half agree. You're saying into two entities, not three. The concern that the labour unions are talking about is job losses. How do you overcome that, or how do you manage that process?
Well, you see, it's an interesting phenomenon, and it's always been with Eskom and the unions. The union bosses, I think, are worried about job losses in their ranks, not in the rank of the average employer. We know that there are massive projects underway, and when we introduce the IPPs into the energy sector, there are going to be new build programs. We are going to have to train people. We are going to have to open new energy sectors. In actual fact, what we're going to do is we're going to be flooding our market with jobs. So for the unions to say that it's going to decrease work offered to them is simply disingenuous. And what it's doing, it's actually taking the power away from union bosses and giving the power back to the employers themselves.
All right, so we need to build more power stations, I would imagine. You're talking about freezing builds, though. How do we get more energy then? The IPPs are not going to be enough.
The IPPs aren't going to be enough just yet, but the way technology is moving and the pace at which technology is moving, the IPPs are going to be enough. What we need to do is we need to focus on maintenance on the power stations that we have that we know will operate correctly. The problem with Medupi and Kusile is that they were built so badly and the designs are so badly done that they're simply not safe and they're not a secure energy source. So what we're saying is stop flooding money and pouring, we're literally hemorrhaging money into Medupi and Kusile. Stop. Let's take that money and let's make sure that the power stations that we have that are operational at the moment are maintained correctly so that we don't have this massive outage as we have at the moment where the power stations simply aren't being maintained.
So we're running out of time and we need a quick solution. What is that? How do we switch on the lights in a year, not in 5 years' time?
I think we should be looking at how do we switch on the lights next week, not in a year's time. When you say we're running out of time, we have run out of time. We have hit day zero when it comes to electricity. We need to start calling on anyone in this country who can produce electricity to make that electricity available to Eskom. Eskom immediately needs to start procuring from independent power producers. There are thousands across the country who haven't had the opportunity. We need to start looking at the finest experts in our country, those that have left Eskom because they were told to leave by a regime that didn't want experts around because they would have been caught out state capturing. We want to get those people back, not in a month, but next week. Get them back and let's get this Eskom going again next week, not in 6 months, not in a year. Peter, we've run out of time. We need energy now.
We've run out of time, but very briefly, we at home are watching you guys and we're just wondering, as politicians, do you get together and say, okay, let's stop this shouting at each other across the floors. We've got a national problem. Let's talk. Do you have those conversations?
We are starting to have those conversations. I'm very lucky that I have Minister Gordhan as my counterpart in Parliament. He's offered me a cup of tea. I'm going to suggest we have something slightly stronger than a cup of tea as we discuss a very difficult issue, but I'm certainly going to insist that we put politics aside, come together as South Africans and find a solution for all South Africans, because this transcends the bound of politics. This is the very future of our country at stake.
Natasha Mazzone, pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll continue to get more reaction from other political parties on the Eskom power challenges on other news programs during the course of the evening. So stay with us for that. We'll be back at the top.